Guest of honor and speaker is Matthew Tukaki, who co-founded the Sustain Group and the EntreHub with Austin Kim in 2010. He did this after leading the world's largest employment company through the height of the global financial crisis. Matthew has had a long and distinguished career in the area of sustainability and sustainable development, business and industry sectors, both occupying a very special intersection between business, government and society, as well as institutions. Matthew is the very first Australian representative to have been elected by business and industry to the United Nations Global Compact 2010, a position he held over 2 successive terms before retiring in November of 2013. Matthew is also the first UNGC local network representative to have been appointed to the governing board of the UNGC by the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, after having been elected by 6 of the 7 regions of the world, representing more than 100 nations. That's a great honor. Between May and September of 2013, Matthew successfully led with the UN Advisory Group one of the largest institutional reform processes yet undertaken by a UN agency, such as the UNGC. Matthew is considered to be an expert and trusted advisor when it comes to the identification and development of social investment opportunities across Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. In 2012-13, he provided more than $1 million in support services and pro bono work to a range of social causes across Asia. He is a committed social investor and innovator when it comes to supporting civil society and not-for-profit organizations. Welcome, Matthew.
Right, I'm going to use a microphone if that's working, because the first lesson I want to teach you when you're an entrepreneur or a social entrepreneur is make sure the video camera is running so you can reuse it for marketing purposes overlay later on. The pitch, whether you're running a social enterprise or a normal business, is still the same. The premise is you've got to connect with an audience and you've got to make a pitch at some point, whether it's about your idea, your product, whether you're raising capital or what have you. Alright, so that's the first lesson I want to teach you. The second thing I want to say before I talk to you a little bit about the EntreHub is a very short story about myself. I have no post-school qualifications whatsoever. I didn't agree with school didn't agree with me. I tried my hand at university and Polytechnic back in New Zealand where I grew up, but that kind of didn't work out as well because I liked parties and booze buses, and when you're elected a student union leader you find other things to do with your time other than studying. Not that I'm advocating anyone go down that path. But my first business, in fact, was when I was 10 years old. And I've always been an entrepreneur for one of a couple of reasons. I grew up in a little place in New Zealand where we didn't have it all. You know, I certainly, if you had told me yesterday or this morning that I ended up running a multi-billion-dollar global corporation, I'd say you had rocks in your head, but there it is. But my beginning was not living in poverty, but you know what, my parents just struggled, and I didn't want to have that for me or my family as my career really developed. I was always in a hurry as well. I didn't like to sit around and just wait for something to happen. And the second lesson about entrepreneurship, whether it's social or otherwise, you've got to make things happen. It's just like building something. Don't build something in the hope that the crowd will gather around you and they will come to you. You've got to go out there and sell and pitch your idea. So I was always in a hurry. So my first business was my sister's Barbie dolls. We basically went into her bedroom, stole them all, set up a table outside the front of the house down by the driveway and sold them. That didn't work out so well because we later learned that nobody in our street had any money to buy new Barbie dolls. So the first lesson I learned was go to where the market is. The second business we had was a little bit naughty. We did get caught by the council, but we had this thing next door to where I was growing up called a reserve. I think you call them what, national parks in Australia. So my grandmother had all these plastic pot plant holders. So we'd go over to her house in the garage and we'd basically nick all the pots, the pot holders. We'd go next door to the reserve, we'd dig up all these native plants, we'd repot them and we'd go and sell them on the streets for people's gardens. Unfortunately for me, I knocked on the door of one of the local councillors who said we weren't allowed to do that, and Dad was unhappy, although Mum sort of fell beside him. The third business we had when we were kids growing up, and there were quite a few, but I'll just tell you a few. was our sugar sack business and firewood. So we learned early on that pine cones where I grew up also burn really well as firewood. So we went down to Grandad's, got a whole lot of sugar sacks. That's what potatoes used to come in. Now they come in plastic bags, which is evil and bad. We would sell them for firewood during winter for $10 a sack and make a whole lot of money. And then the final one I'll just give you an insight into was our golf ball business. We used to have to go and clean up all the dog crap in the backyard. So we found a unique proposition, a connection between the dog crap in the backyard and the golf course. We would go and get all the dog crap, go up to the Timaru golf course and put all the dog crap in the golf holes. So when people went and knocked their golf ball out, of course it was smothered in something not too nice and they'd throw it away. We'd run after these golf balls and we'd sell them at Maidstone Football Sports for like a ball. Now, why I'm telling you all this is that entrepreneurship is part creativity and part risk. And it's not learnt over a book, it's learnt by a sustained series of actions over your life, built up through experience and the desire to want to do something and not just work for the man all the time. Now again, that doesn't mean that social entrepreneurship in many ways is any different. When I arrived in Australia 15 years ago, I had credit cards. Thank you back in New Zealand into the camera, I've never paid back. A backpack and maybe about $25 in my pocket. I lived in a motel in Surrey Hills in Sydney and I think it was $30 a night. It was really dodgy and really bad. And then, like I say, 15 years later, I'm on boards of any number of public and private companies. I ended up running the world's biggest employment company, Deakin International, for those of you who may not be so familiar with the employment market just yet, but for anyone older in the room, I'm sure they know who Deakin International is. And my last day on the job, I had about, in Australia, from memory, about 44,000 employees on the ground, running everything from air traffic control towers in Townsville to if you go into the branch of ANZ Bank, they would be Deakin employees. So my journey has been really interesting and a bit of fun. Along the way I've learned a whole lot of different things that enabled me to say, well, entrepreneurship is one part passion for what it is you're trying to sell or pitch, no matter what that idea or concept is seated in, whether it's a social good or something else. And then the second thing, which is really important, is the pitch. So make sure that your idea is conveyed in such a way that you'll be able to gather people around you and sell it. Because the premise of wanting to do a social good is exactly the same. You want people, it's like politics. People in this country generally vote along two tribal lines, either the left or the right. And it's a battle to try and convince people to shift slightly to the left or slightly to the right. So every 3 years, somebody is elected in whoever's favour and majority's favour. And in a way, entrepreneurship in terms of the social good is exactly the same thing. We've got a whole lot of people over here that really fundamentally, for example, believe in climate change, and then you have some other people over here who don't believe in it, and depending on how loud those voices come, can depend on whether or not the issue, however good it is actually taken on board by the majority. So there are a couple of things in that. Lately, I've become the head of the EntreHub. And I'm going to delve into a couple of things about building a social enterprise in a minute. But essentially, the EntreHub is nearly 20,000 members strong across 81 countries around the world. And what we do is we build content around teaching and educating people, not from the theoretical world, that's the role in many ways for a university, or a polytechnic or vocational training institutions. We teach people about real-life stories and examples of things that have happened and where people are today and their journey from point A to point Z. All the successes, but also, please note that as entrepreneurs we all fail. My first 3 companies that I started up were complete and utter failures. One of the case studies we focus here on, Omar Hanui, that will shift to the right shortly, he only sold his company to Google for $750 million after the iPhone was invented. So there are all sorts of different things that the EntreHub can teach you, and I encourage you to join. It's free to join, doesn't cost anything, and there's a whole lot of information on here about social enterprises and that sort of stuff as well. What I wanted to do though is spend a bit of time and not talk about the story of what, or the case study. You've had a couple of those this morning. I want to talk to you instead about some of the really important things that you've got to get right, whether it's a social enterprise or not. So if you go to downloads and you click on 15 great startup tips, it's no different. All right. So for this, probably more so for the younger people in the room his students. The first thing you need to do when developing a social enterprise or a business more generally is to make sure you know the market. The reality is that even though we might think we have the best idea in the world, the truth is somebody else has already had it somewhere else. And in fact, a gentleman by the name of Professor Alan Grossman from the Harvard Business School, who teaches a lot on social investment, social impact, and also building social enterprise, and I'll show you this link on the website to a video presentation that he gives. He basically says that if you go to an investor and seek money from an investor, don't kid yourself. We've all heard the idea in some other form before. What we're looking for is what your unique sales proposition actually is. And so the important thing is to know the market and know who the competitors are. And let me tell you, in the social enterprise space, in the not-for-profit space, it is just as cutthroat and just as competitive as the business world. And I'll give you an example. In the world of suicide prevention, I'm on the board of suicide prevention in Australia. Now we battle for funding left, right and centre. Now we've just formed a new collective impact initiative gathering all of the major organisations together to try and reduce suicide in Australia by half within the next decade. Now previous to that, we still competed with Beyond Blue and Lifeline, the Lifeline Foundation and the Black Dog Institute, but we're competing with them for different things, not just funding, we're also competing with them for noise and attention. We want people to believe our story and therefore our way of doing things is the best way versus possibly 100 other players out there. So knowing the market, you've got to know who's doing what, where, why and when, because you don't want to have to go to mum and dad or anybody else and ask them for money, knowing full well that possibly in 12 months' time this thing might not go anywhere. The second thing that's really important that you still have to focus on is writing a business plan. I don't know how many people come to me and just think that writing a pitch on 2 PowerPoint slides is good enough. No, if you want $100,000 or $150,000 or however much it is, I'm more than happy to consider your idea, but I want to see a business plan because I want to know that you've thought through how this thing will work. Social enterprise or not. Business enterprise or not. So it's really important to still get the fundamentals right. The third is raising capital to fund the business. Now in the world of social enterprise, there's this unique method coming to the air called crowdfunding. Who's heard of crowdfunding? Yep. Crowdfunding is this amazing opportunity for social enterprises and not-for-profit organisations to go out to the crowd and raise money through a dedicated platform like Indiegogo or Kickstarter or Personalise. The world's #3 crowdfunding website is located right here in Melbourne, and it's called Personalise. Now the problem with crowdfunding is though that people run at this thing, put a project up without any defined strategy about how to raise money through the crowd. So they think that just by putting some photos up and putting what the dream is, that it's somehow going to sell. The truth is that the vast majority of crowdfunding projects fail for the same reason that if you go and try and raise capital from a donor or a corporate or a philanthropist for any other means, it fails because the plan isn't clear. There's no execution strategy. There's no reason or method of the madness about why you put this particular photo up or how it speaks to the crowd that you're trying to connect with. The other thing about raising capital to fund the business is that in Australia today, and I'll be honest with you, it's a limited supply. So you've got to be even more creative. Now tomorrow night for the not-for-profit social enterprise organisations in the room is going to be a really interesting one, because so many not-for-profits have already been given their notice that they're going to be defunded by the Australian government. So the other strategy that needs to be put in place is the diversification of your revenue. So wherever you get your money from, try and not attempt to get it from a single source. Try and diversify it and spread it out. Again, it doesn't matter if you're a social enterprise or a normal enterprise. The fifth thing you've got to do is substantiate your idea before launch by market testing it. You're testing and guinea pigging whether or not it's going to be accepted and whether or not it's going to get scoped or sale. So go and download these, by the way, when you can. The fourth is at some point know that the truth is better than a lie. Now, what do I mean by that? The truth is that sometimes you're lying to yourself if you think it's going to work. Sometimes you need to stop, pause, have a cup of tea, maybe an alcohol beverage or 3 over a beer with some coasters, and define whether or not there's something missing or another gap here that I haven't quite thought of. And in many ways, what you want to do is not do that by yourself, but throw it out to a group of people who can give you some independent thinking. And not your friends or family, because your friends and family will tell you exactly what you always want to hear. They don't want to necessarily tell you that you're sitting on a bad idea. And then later, of course, when the idea fails, they'll say, oh, well, you've learned it valuable lesson, haven't you, son? So you want to throw it out to some independent thinking where you possibly can. The sixth really important part about building your social enterprise is your unique sales proposition. Your USP is something that sits at the centre of whether or not you're going to succeed or fail. And your USP is not just about your product or your idea, it's about the individual making the pitch. So, for example, the Nepalese story. Your daughter is your USP, basically. The unique sales proposition is the ability for that person to stand up and sell the idea and communicate it effectively to the crowd. It's backed up by these sorts of products over here that are available in the marketplace that may not be produced in such a way in any other area. So you've got to understand what your USP is, because if you know what your USP is and you communicate that effectively, then the ability for you to gather your crowd around you to support your cause is going to be that much easier. If you don't know your USP, how do you expect anybody else to understand what it is you're actually selling? And that comes back to some of the discussion before about mission statements. Know exactly what your mission statement is, but also know how to convert your mission statement into a USP. Your brand is really important. I don't know how many people rush into social media and have one brand or one image on their Twitter account and something different on a Facebook page and a LinkedIn group and Pinterest and Instagram and a website and a business card. It's called confusion. There's no identity. You need to build your brand immediately from the beginning. And the reason you want to do that is because eventually, if you succeed, the value of your brand may in fact supersede your balance sheet. Now that's a whole other discussion, but possibly another workshop, but your brand identity itself, if managed well, if there's consistency and flow, might cause people to think that you've always just been around and therefore you've become a trusted organisation in whatever it is you're trying to deliver. The seventh, I skipped one, is engaging with social media. Even though I mentioned the brand consistency across social media, people make the mistake of just rushing into social media believing that they need to be on Facebook. And I don't know how many organisations have got it wrong. Now I'll give you a calculation. It's a very simple one that we're putting out there, that we've put out there in the last few weeks. And it's kind of like that cash flow and understanding how much your business costs to run, right? So don't think that just by sitting there at night and playing around on Facebook and making some posts and uploading some photos and then tweeting them out or going into LinkedIn or what have you, don't think that it's an immaterial cost to what it is you're trying to do, because it's not. Everything you do should be costed and calculated, because it will give you a true indication of where your organisation sits financially. Now you can say and justify to yourself that I'm going to get my idea up and I'm going to work for free. Well, I'm going to blow an illusion. Working for free doesn't pay your rent. Working for free doesn't pay the bills or put food on the table. You still have to make money, and that's a central premise behind a business. You have to be profitable to be sustainable. So in terms of social media strategy and Facebook, you've got to try and pin down the cost. The calculation I give is that research out of the United States says small business in particular spend about 6 to 8 hours a week on social media. Now, I think it's probably a lot more than that, but I can't deal with anecdotal. I'll deal with whatever the data is that's out there. If you say that it's $25 an hour is your basic labour cost, and you times 6 by 25 and then times that amount by 52, you get to a figure of around $10,000. Now, if you understand how much it costs you to play around with all these things, then the meaning behind what you're doing on those platforms will be even stronger. Right? So you've got to calculate the cost. And just because there's this inherent belief you should be on social media doesn't mean to say you should be at all. It's a misconception that you should start a Facebook page for the sake of starting. The other reason too you've got to be very careful is that the people that will draw to you initially for whatever idea it is will be your family and friends. Now, I don't know how many family and friends I've befriended because I just get sick and tired of the constant posts that come up in my newsfeed. So you've got to be very careful that your social media strategy also doesn't overwhelm the very people that you're getting to believe in you. Lesson number 9 is cash flow is king. You've got to know that cash flow is king. Whether you're running a small business, a large business, a social enterprise or not, You've got to know that you've got money in the bank to pay the very bills that you need to pay. And there are inventive, creative ways around managing cash flow, like knowing when invoices fall due and all the rest of it. But understand that cash flow is a really important part of what you do. Don't just also think that this government grant will come in and it'll solve all my problems. Well, no, it'll probably back pay whatever you've already booked up in the debt. It won't necessarily forward plan for what you've got coming next. So you've got to be really careful. 11 is a tax man. I hate the tax man personally, and the tax man doesn't like me. But you've got to understand that in all of these adventures, tax is payable on a lot of the things that you do. But more importantly, if you understand the tax system, you'll understand what concessions are available too around things like product innovation or research and development, etc. Your website, cheap and clear, getting your share structure right, ignore that one, securing the first customer, and then importantly having an exit strategy. Things that are a little bit different for social enterprises, and I'll just head to a link on our website as well, is knowing full well that in order to sell your product or idea, something that was alluded to this morning with your rugby player friend, Sterling Murdoch.
Yes.
If you're in the business of social enterprise, you want an ambassador. That's what I call ambassadors. And the reason being is you want them to both sell on your behalf, but you also want the right ambassador. So that ambassador needs to be somehow connected to what it is you're selling. So they might be Sterling Murdoch, but if Sterling is, you're asking to head some kind of soccer foundation in Brazil, then it's obviously the wrong ambassador you've got to go out and search for. You've also got to surround yourself with a team of people. Another point that was made this morning, a team of people who can effectively fill the gaps that you don't have. Don't be arrogant and think you can do all things, you can't. You might start off being the receptionist and the cleaner and the chief bottle washer, but eventually there will be more complex skills and needs that you're going to require. For example, government relations. Understanding who you need to talk to in the body politic, which unfortunately is a big thing with social enterprises today because they haven't quite diversified away from total reliance on one single source of income. So what I'm trying to get across in 25 minutes or less is the fact that a social enterprise is very much like a normal business. The same sorts of fundamentals that underpin a successful business also underpin a successful social enterprise. The difference is that what you're focused on is the social good as one of the key outcomes. But to achieve that social good and to continue achieving an effective outcome of alleviating poverty or empowering women or stopping child labour or supply chain stuff with the textile industry in Bangladesh, you still have to be a sustainable social enterprise. You still have to have a sustainable business model, sustainable cash flow, sustainable sources of income, a team that's effective, and a presence online that isn't going to kill your business from the beginning. The last thing I would leave you with is a lesson, a really important lesson that I've learned. There are two types of social entrepreneurs in my eyes. A social entrepreneur who comes at it from the very beginning but hasn't had really any business or commercial experience. And there are people who are quite young, who see the world around them and you know what, they hate it, they hate what they see, they can't understand why it's happening, and they want to go out there and they want to change the world immediately. Then there are people like me who have grey hair and a bit round in the tummy, who have a significant amount of business and commercial experience that have arrived at this point after learning lessons in business, but a lot later on in my career. Now 10 years ago, the truth is I had no idea what sustainability was. I had no idea what corporate social responsibility was. But when I became the UNGC's representative and then led the UNGC globally and local networks globally, I learned some really important lessons, and here they are. Number one, you can't have environmental or social change unless you have economic development in developing countries or even in developed countries. And the reason being is that the population is growing to such an extent that we're seeing vast numbers of unemployed people arrive into cities and towns with no formal qualifications and skills whatsoever. So you've got to understand that there is an economic dynamic that's driving a lot of the societies and communities as they alleviate themselves from poverty and as they start developing up. So you can't disconnect the economic discussion from the social and the environmental need. And there was a very famous lady called Gro Brundtland, who a lot of you in the room probably never heard of. Gro Brundtland, former Norwegian Prime Minister, ended up running the world's first Earth Commission and was, I guess, the mother of the Rio+20 kind of movement. Now, the Rio movement is all about how do you take the three pillars of social, environmental and economic to try and build some kind of cohesive strategy of change. Now, 25 years ago, business was never involved in that discussion or that narrative. But today they are a lot more so under the guise of corporate social responsibility and sustainability. Now, the reason they're more engaged is there's a realisation that if one nation crosses the border of another nation state, we call that an invasion, and that's very naughty. And I use that as a very reference term to what's going on in the world today. Versus when a business crosses the border of another nation state, we call that investment, and with that investment comes creation of jobs and economic development and those sorts of things. So if you're developing a social enterprise model, it's worth having a look at the work of the UN when it comes to, or the Global Compact, when it comes to building sustainable development models and sustainable social enterprises. And you can find that at unglobalcompact.org. So that's it from me. There's a lot of information on our website. There's a lot of definitions that you might not have seen before. There's some video links to Harvard University's Alan Grossman on building a social enterprise business plan, which is very interesting. There's also a link to something called the Theory of Change for Community Organisations that you might be interested in from the Aspen Institute, which is a really great body of work that brings people inside your idea before it's launched to test the boundaries of whether it's going to get off the ground. And then, of course, we have a huge Facebook site and a Twitter feed, so feel free to push those buttons up in the top right-hand corner and join the EntreHub journey. Thank you.